Today, we are going to cover David Ferrie and his alleged trip to the Winterland Ice Arena. Uh-oh, I got sound. That's no good. There we go. All right, so this really is a story that is very near and dear to my heart. It was one of the first discoveries I made that really allowed me to come to grips with the fact that there was still a lot of room for discovery in the assassination. When I started studying Kennedy, I kind of went into it with the idea that it's been 60 fucking years, right? These people had to have gotten to the bottom of everything they could possibly get to the bottom of. And then I realized that that was not the case. Far from it. And so the trip that David Ferrie allegedly took from New Orleans up through Baton Rouge and to Houston and then to Galveston and back, it never happened like they said it happened. And it was really put together to provide an alibi for David Ferrie, who was in Dallas. So, let me begin. What we're going to start with are the documents pertaining to the FBI's initial investigation once David Ferrie made it back to New Orleans after the assassination. You see, Jack Martin ratted him out, called the FBI, dropped a line on him, said that he was probably involved in the assassination. And so the Sunday following the assassination, the 24th, the FBI and then subsequently Jim Garrison became very busy attempting to get a hold of Ferrie. And so the entire story of the Winterland was supposed to be an alibi to cover for him, as you'll be able to tell as we go through it, clearly fully planned in advance, right? So I don't believe they had intended on Ferrie getting popped immediately when he got back to New Orleans. But hey, it is what it is. I'm going to do another show on Jack Martin one of these days. I did one a couple years ago. Jack Martin, another person with multiple people using a single identity. But that's a whole other story. So, subsequent investigation by New Orleans office disclosed information was received by New Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, New Orleans, November 24 last, that when David William Ferrie allegedly taught Lee Harvey Oswald use of telescopic sight on rifle. DA's office concluded Ferrie possibly involved in assassination of president and conducted investigation to locate. Ferrie was absent from his residence when investigators went there. To Director and SAC Dallas from SAC, that's Special Agent in Charge, New Orleans, assassination of President John F. Kennedy, November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. Telephone calls, November 25 last, to Supervisor Richard Gallagher from New Orleans, David William Ferrie. During the morning of November 25, press inquiry received by New Orleans office concerning arrest of Leighton Patrick Martins and Alvin Roland Beaubouf, arrested early morning of November 25 by New Orleans PD on vagrancy charges with notation in arrest book that they were being held for Secret Service and FBI. So, if you didn't know, and you didn't see the last show I did on David Ferrie, which I believe is part 6 of the David Ferrie files, within the first 5 minutes, I show you slam dunk proof David Ferrie was in Dallas, and that Leighton Martins and Alvin Beaubouf were there also in Dealey Plaza. Now, the issue that you'll see coming up is that Leighton Martins used an alias. He used the alias of Melvin Coffee. And Melvin Coffee, as you'll see, there are statements from Melvin Coffee, who's denying the whole thing, getting tripped up in wrong answers. But the alias game is played by using the name of a real person whom you know, so that when the investigators go and talk to that person, they can provide whatever story you want. And they were never there, so if it's ever outed that they weren't there, it still, leaves no trail to the person who was, right? So that's kind of how the alias game works. It's usually a shared alias, because Melvin Coffee comes up 2 or 3 times in an alias situation in the Kennedy assassination. Moving on. Ferrie stated that from October 11 to October 18, he was in Guatemala And again, from October 30, 1963 to November 1st, 1963, he was in Guatemala in connection with investigation of Marcello case. Ferrie said that prior to a very recent trip, he was last in the state of Texas in August of 1962, at which time he was in Orange, Texas. Ferrie said that he had planned during the trial of Marcello case that immediately upon the conclusion of the case, he would take a trip for the purpose of relaxing. So here he's saying that he had planned the trip during the trial. He said that he left his home at 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, New Orleans, on November 22nd, 1963 at 6:30 p.m. in his 1961 light blue Comet four-door station wagon, which he purchased from the Delta Mercury Company in New Orleans within the past month. He stated that Charles Graham, a salesman at Delta Mercury Company, sold the Comet station wagon to him. Ferrie related that on leaving his home, he drove to the homes of Alvin Beaubouf and Melvin Coffey and picked them up in order that they might accompany him on the trip. He stated that at the time he left his home and did not know where he was going. He said that the purpose of the trip was merely to relax and that at the time he did not know whether he was going hunting, drinking, or driving. Ferrie stated that he did not take any firearms with him when he left his home because he thought he might go out of the state of Louisiana and did not know what the hunting seasons were in other states. He was also concerned about transporting firearms across state lines. Ferrie said that he had been considering for some time the feasibility and possibility of opening an ice skating rink in New Orleans. He claimed that he made a telephone call, possibly from Melvin Coffey's home, to Chuck Rowland at the Winterland skating rink in Houston, Texas. He advised this call to Rowland was charged to either telephone number 899-3598 or 486-3127. Ferrie claimed that he had no prior acquaintance with Rowland, but had knowledge of the fact that the Winterland skating rink was located in Houston. So, Ferrie is beginning to relay this story that he had fabricated in advance. Although you can see there's already some contradictions in what he's saying. He's saying that he did not know if he was going to go hunting, drinking, or driving when he left for the trip, but the phone records will show that he had previously called the Winterland Ice Arena, the Winterland skating rink there in Houston, prior to this day. So his story falls apart right off the bat. It was not an impromptu trip. In fact, it wasn't a trip at all. After arriving at the motel, this would be the Alamo Motel, and they arrived about 4:30 in the morning. After arriving at the motel, he placed a telephone call to attorney G. Ray Gill, but was unable to complete this call. He placed a second call to the Town and Country Motel in an effort to determine whether attorney Gill was located at the Town and Country Motel. Ferrie further related that Alvin Beaubouf may have made a phone call to his home. He said that later he checked out of the Alamo Motel and went to the Bel Air skating rink on Chimney Rock Road in the Bellevue section of Houston, arriving there between 7:30 and 8 p.m. This is extremely fucking important. He said he went to the Bel Air skating rink. Okay? The Bel Air. Now, we'll cover the Bel Air here shortly. Just remember that name. Ferrie stated that he looked the skating rink over and tried to locate the owner, but the owner was unavailable. He said that he remained at the Bel Air skating rink for approximately 45 minutes to 1 hour. On leaving the skating rink, he drove out Old Spanish Fort Trail and stopped at a restaurant near Telephone Road. They left this restaurant approximately 9 o'clock or shortly after 9 o'clock and decided to drive to Galveston, Texas. He said that while en route to Galveston, Texas, they stopped at the Manned Spacecraft Center and looked around for about 20 minutes. That's a weird nuance in the story. Obviously, it didn't happen because he didn't go there, but why did they bring it up? Was there something involving the Space Center that they threw that in there just to cover, just in case that we never became aware of? I think that's a good possibility. They then proceeded to Galveston, Texas, arriving there between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m. They immediately checked into room 117 at the Driftwood Motel, 3128 Seawall Boulevard, Galveston. After checking into the motel, they drove around in the vicinity of some old clubs in Galveston, Texas, returning to the motel sometime after midnight, and it could possibly have been as late as 1 a.m. Ferrie stated that he and his companions awakened roughly at noon after having breakfast, and he went down to Main Street, Sears Roebuck and Company, where he purchased a jacket, a sweater, and several other items. After leaving Sears, they directly drove to the Winterland Ice Skating Rink, 2400 Norfolk. That's not there anymore. It's been knocked down. which he had learned opened at 3:30 p.m. and closed at 5:30 p.m. Ferrie said he rented skates and skated at the rink for a while, looking the situation over and also taking into consideration the amount of business at the rink. He stated that he then introduced himself to Chuck Rowland and spoke with him at length concerning the installation and operation of the rink. Ferrie exhibited a leaflet of the Winterland ice skating rink, 2400 Norfolk, Houston, Texas, which he had in his possession. Ferrie stated that during the time he was talking to Chuck Rowland, other employees of Rowland were present at the rink. He recalled specifically there was a young boy there who was passing out skates and an older man who was on duty at the rink, but he does not recall whether he was introduced to these two individuals or not. Ferrie claimed that he remained at the Winterland skating rink for a period of approximately 2 hours, and after leaving there, he returned to the motel. Ferrie stated that they arose at 8 or 8:30 a.m. on November 24th, 1963. That's the Sunday. After having had breakfast, they took the ferry across the bay to pick up the road to Port Arthur that runs along the coast. Okay, so let me pause right here and go over some clarification on the dates and times that this stuff happened. So on November 22nd, this is the official story I'm giving you. Or this is Ferrie's version, but it is backed by the official story, which is complete bullshit. So allegedly, David Ferrie is seen at G. Ray Gill's office at 12:30 p.m. by Alice Guidros, who is G. Ray Gill's secretary. She fucking lied. David Ferrie was in Dallas. Later on that afternoon, Carlos Marcello, his case is dismissed. If you dig through the documents, it is alleged that witnesses saw David Ferrie in the courtroom. However, there are no witnesses to that. You will not find a name attached to any statement that says they saw David Ferrie in the courtroom. And the closest we have is the statement from Alice Guidros putting David Ferrie in the office with her at 12:30 p.m. in New Orleans. But that statement is completely false because David Ferrie had been in New Orleans or in Dallas for at least 2 days. So, allegedly, David Ferrie says that he leaves about 3:30, but his dates and times are all mixed up here. Carlos Marcello has a party that evening. I believe it's around 6:30 p.m. Allegedly, everyone there at this mobster's fucking party said that David Ferrie was there, but come on. You can't trust any of these people. You're going to trust Carlos Marcello as a fucking witness? Give me a break. And then allegedly, they don't end up leaving New Orleans. They go through Kenner, and then they do this at like 9 o'clock at night, and they get to the Alamo Motel on the 23rd at 4:30 in the morning, right? So the night after the assassination occurs. Then the next morning, allegedly, they get up, they go to Sears Roebuck, which is what it was called back in 1963, and they buy some sweaters and jackets and this and that. Now, I'm going to pause right here, and I'm going to give you some commentary on some other witnesses in regards to the hotel they stayed at, which is the Alamo Motel. Other witnesses who worked at the Alamo Motel stated that when they checked out on the 24th, right? So they checked out on the 24th, but they were also checked into the Driftwood the night of the 23rd, as we just went over. So they were simultaneously checked into 2 hotels at the same time, the night of the 23rd. The morning of the 24th, when they check out, a blonde woman is seen at the Alamo Motel in their room. So, I believe that blonde woman to be Candy Barr, but we're going to have to talk about her another time because the only indication I have there is the blonde woman. However, Candy Barr most certainly was connected to Carrie Thornley and contacting Carrie Thornley from the Carousel Club at the boarding house at North Marsalis. So we know there's a connection from Candy Barr to the assassination through Jack Ruby and Carrie Thornley, like for sure. So, but that, to me, that's more of an indicator of why Jack Ruby ended up going to Galveston. And we're not going to talk about that at all today because I'm still fucking working on it. And it's pissing me off because it's been like a sticking point for me for years now. 3-4 years at this point. Jack Ruby went to Galveston too. And he went there to bring Andrew Jerome Blackman back to his boat, the Metaranga, which left on Monday, the following Monday, the 25th, right? Blackman gets interrogated on the Tuesday, the 26th, like crazy. So it was most certainly him. But I haven't put together I haven't connected all the dots involving Jack Ruby and his trip. But I know that he went with Blackman, and there was a blonde woman seen in the motel that they obviously booked for someone else because they stayed at the Driftwood on the 23rd. So the night of the 23rd, another group of people stayed there, and I believe that was Jack Ruby, Candy Barr, and Andrew Blackman. So, but then you have after the 25th, after the kids are on the 24th, when the kids are dropped off at night, then you have Sergio Arcacha going back to the Alamo Motel, I think coordinating around the time that they check out, and then heading back up to Dallas. But I'm still working on these fine details, this last couple things. So, but I'll continue. So Ferrie stated they arose about 8 or 8:30 on November 24th. After having breakfast, they took the ferry across the bay to pick up the road to Port Arthur. So they're on the return trip home now after having gone to the Winterland and then to Galveston. And they take the highway that runs along the coast. Ferrie stated the first stop they made after reaching Port Arthur was at the Gulf Service station on the left-hand side of the highway in Port Arthur, where they purchased a new set of spark plugs for the Comet station wagon. He stated that there was a television set in this station, and as he walked into the station, there was a picture on the television showing the shooting of Lee Oswald in the basement of Dallas City Jail. Ferrie said he presumed he was looking at the original live broadcast of the shooting, and that this was in the vicinity of 12 noon on that date. Now, if you'll recall, I believe earlier he said he'd gotten up at noon, or no, that was the day before. Never mind. So he said that after changing the spark plugs in the station wagon, he ran the car up on the rack in order for the attendant to check the transmission and differential. Ferrie estimated that he remained at the service station approximately 20 to 30 minutes. They left Port Arthur and drove to Orange, Texas. After crossing the Louisiana state line, they stopped at Buster's Bar and Restaurant. He stated that the operator of Buster's Bar and Restaurant is Marion James Johnson, who was a client of attorney G. Ray Gill. He stated that he contacted Johnson at the bar and restaurant and talked to Johnson for approximately 30 minutes, discussing the status of an appeal on a perjury conviction of Johnson in connection with an income tax case on Sheriff Reed at Lake Charles, Louisiana. Now, this stuff with Buster's Bar and Marion James Johnson is pretty interesting. One of the more interesting things about it is that at different times, David Ferrie couldn't fucking remember if he went to Buster's Bar on the way to Houston or on the way home. Here he's saying on the way home, but in the very initial conversation that Garrison has with him, he says they stopped on the way there. So there are clues all throughout these statements in this FBI report that clearly indicate David Ferrie didn't know what the fuck he was talking about, right? And the same thing with Melvin Coffey when we get to Melvin Coffey, because remember, Melvin Coffey didn't go on this trip either. That was just an alias being used by Leighton Martins. And so when we get to his statement, you'll see he didn't know what the fuck time it was either. And if neither of them knew what the fuck time it was, you can guarantee Garrison knew that neither of them knew what the fuck time it was, right? God, what I wouldn't do for Garrison's missing files. All right, so here we are with the statement of Melvin Coffey. Coffey stated that Ferrie picked both he and Bo Boof up on Friday evening, November 22nd, 1963, and they left New Orleans in Ferrie's Comet station wagon and drove to John Paul's restaurant in Kenner where they ate supper. They then said they then left Kenner between 9 and 9:30 that night and traveled by way of Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, and on to Houston, Texas. Coffey stated that they arrived in Houston approximately 4:30 a.m., November 23rd, checked into the Alamo Motel. He stated that they did not leave the motel that morning, but retired shortly after their arrival. He stated that to the best of his recollection, they arose at approximately 2 p.m., and that the three of them went to Sears Roebuck and Company where they purchased jackets and sweaters. Coffey then stated they went to the Winterland skating rink where they went ice skating for a while, and they went skating for a while, and later contacted the owner of the skating rink. Okay, that is completely bullshit, because when they walked in, David Ferrie went right up to Chuck Rowland and introduced himself as David Ferrie. And one of the things that tipped me off that there was some shenanigans at the Winterland was that when you go through the statement of Chuck Rowland, and we'll get to Chuck Rowland here shortly, but Chuck Rowland's the guy who meets him at the skating rink. Chuck Rowland said that David Ferrie introduced himself as David Ferrie and said, "I'm here," no less than 5 times. Why would you do that? Why would you introduce yourself, say, "Hey, I'm here, I'm David Ferrie"? Why would you do that no less than 5 times? Because you want to make sure that that person remembers that you were there and that you're goddamn David Ferrie. Because if you're not David Ferrie and you're elsewhere, you're going to have to go out of your way to make sure that the guy knows David Ferrie was there, which is exactly what happened. Coffey stated that they arrived in Houston, Texas about 4:30 a.m., November 23rd, checked into Al Motel. He stated they did not leave the motel that morning, but retired shortly after their arrival. He said they went to the best of his recollection, they arose approximately 2 o'clock, and the three of them went to Sears Roebuck. Then they went to the Winterland. So, yes, Melvin Coffey, this is hilarious. Like, when you dig through the real statement of Melvin Coffey, like the long version, he trips himself up like 4 or 5 times. He wasn't there. He was told what to say. Things that he pointed out and highlighted were like, after the fact, seemingly irrelevant. So what do you do when you coordinate with somebody and you tell them, hey, make sure you point out this detail, but then later that detail doesn't become relevant and you point it out anyway? Right? That's the kind of shit that happened. So after leaving the skating rink, they returned to the motel where they remained until approximately 7:30 or 8 p.m., at which time they checked out. So Melvin Coffey is now stating that they checked out of the Winterland. They checked out of the Ala Motel at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. But that is false because we have the records that show they checked out the following morning. They stopped to eat at an unknown restaurant and then proceeded to Galveston, Texas. He stated they arrived in Galveston about 11:30 at night, checked into the Driftwood Motel, and retired for the night. The timing on that is accurate. Coffey stated they arose early on the morning of November 24th, and after having had breakfast, drove to Port Arthur, Texas. He said they purchased a set of spark plugs for the Comet station wagon at an unknown service station in Port Arthur, Texas. They then drove through Orange, Texas, and after crossing the Louisiana state line, stopped at a bar and restaurant operated by an individual known to him by the name of Buster. Coffey said that Ferrie knew Buster, and that after Ferrie had conversation with this person, approximately 1/2 hour, they proceeded to Alexandria, Louisiana. The Alexandria, Louisiana thing got me kind of thrown off. Garrison spent a lot of time on Alexandria, Louisiana, and a specific hotel in Alexandria. There's a bunch of documents on there. But also Clay Shaw's mother lived in Alexandria. Allegedly, Alex Beaubouf's had family in Alexandria. And the big shocker for me, which I really have only come to really conclude this week, is that David Ferrie had a son, David Ferrie Jr., who was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps in 1963. And he had an address in Alexandria, Louisiana. So, why they really go to Alexandria? Who the fuck knows? Did it have to do with Clay Shaw getting from Dallas? Nah, Clay Shaw wouldn't have gone from Dallas to New Orleans. Or would he? Because Clay Shaw ends up on the 24th, I believe, in Portland, Oregon. Like he said, he took a train, but nobody can verify his alibi. A whole bunch of weird stuff around that. I still need to spend about a year on Clay Shaw, so don't quote me on any of that. But why the fuck did they go to Alexandria is another mystery for me. Coffey stated Alvin Beaubouf had relatives in Alexandria, and they planned to socialize while in Alexandria and then return to New Orleans. When you look where Alexandria is, it's way out of the way. It's way north of New Orleans. It doesn't make any sense for them to have gone there. He said after arriving in Alexandria, David Ferrie attempted to contact attorney G. Ray Gill, but was unsuccessful in contacting him. Ferrie then called his home and learned from Leighton Martins that allegations had been made involving Ferrie in the assassination of President Kennedy. Coffey said that after learning this, they immediately returned to New Orleans, and that on arrival in New Orleans, Ferrie dropped him at his home. Coffey stated he never heard David Ferrie make any statements that he thought President Kennedy should be killed, and has never heard him outline any plans or make any comments as to how this could be done or how to do it. Remember, Melvin Coffey has nothing to do with nothing. He didn't go to Dallas. Leighton Martins did. It was nothing more than a borrowed name for an alias. All right, investigation. This looks like another FBI document. Investigation Houston reflects D.W. Ferrie, Alvin Beaubouf, and Melvin Coffey registered room 19, Ala Motel, 4:30 a.m., November 23 last. Checked out 8 or 9 p.m. November 24 last. So an FBI document confirming that they didn't check out of the Ala Motel till November 24. The same day they checked out of Galveston. So they're checked in the Driftwood and the Ala Motel the night of the 23rd. And David Ferrie didn't fucking stay in either one of those. So, who did? They were driving a Comet automobile bearing license LA blah, blah, blah. They arrived at the motel and made a long-distance call to New Orleans. And those are the numbers they called in New Orleans. And also calls to radio station, which we will get to. So, Frank William Powell, Week Service Station, Highway 87, Port Arthur, Texas, advised that on November 24 last, In the early afternoon, 3 men in a light blue 61 Comet station wagon stopped at the station and purchased a set of spark plugs. The driver, described as a white male, early 20s, 5'9" tall, 5'9" to 5'10" tall, 130 to 140 pounds, light brown hair, cut short. That's Alvin Boboof. Number 2, described as white male, 45, I can't read that, 35 to 45, 5'10" to 6 foot tall, heavy build, dark hair, dark trousers, and a cowboy hat. All right. The cowboy hat gives it away here. This is Sergio Arcata Smith. This is not David Ferrie, because David Ferrie isn't on this trip. It's a fucking alibi, right? Sergio Arcata Smith is known to have worn a cowboy hat. There's at least one photograph out there that I've seen of him wearing a tan cowboy hat. And so, yeah, David Ferrie never wore a cowboy hat, ever. So, those are the official story documents on... that's not even all of them. That's just a fraction of them, because I don't want to be here for 10 years. So... let me see if I can find where I'm going to start with the rest of the stuff. No, that's not it. All right, we go. So now we're going to go through my original work on the Winterland and what really went down. And I'm going to go through the process by which I discovered that the entire story that I just told you is a crock of bullshit, right? So I was able to locate a private group, and I was able to gain access to this private group, and it was called Winterland Memories, and it was actually only created in 2018. And in that group were about, I don't know, 60 or 70 people who had grown up in Houston, who had spent time at the Winterland, and they posted all of their original Winterland photos and memorabilia that they have. And to date, I am the only Kennedy researcher to ever produce these. So you're not going to see these anywhere else. And the group that I was in, I don't believe is around any longer. So this is probably the only place that anyone will ever be able to see any of this stuff. So I want to go through some pictures. I'm going to take you on a journey back to the 1960s and 70s. And I want to show you what the Winterland was, what it looked like, the people who went there. I want to give you a snapshot of the culture at the time. So here we go with a sign of the Winterland. Looks kind of probably, this is much later, must have been in the 70s when it's kind of run down. But it was a big place. Big place. I'm sure every town, at least I had one growing up, every town has to have like some kind of skating rink. So here on the left, we have like a booklet or a brochure from the Winterland. Now, I think this is much later. This offer here says it's got a coupon and it says expires in 67. So it must have been probably 65, 66 that this came out. But it says something extremely important and something that was very relevant in 1963. It says, Houston's only ice arena. Well, where did David Ferrie state that he went after he left the Winterland? He stated that he went to the Bel Air ice skating rink. Well, there was no Bel Air. There was no Bel Air skating rink. Not in 1963. But we'll get to that. This here, to me, was very key in determining that this was the only ice skating rink and that the Bel Air was not an ice skating rink. Looks like we have some newspaper images of the rink itself, published in the Houston Chronicle back, looks like 1973. Personally, I love this stuff. This is a fascinating snapshot into a very niche, aspect of American history. What is it? Spring Carnival 69. Ice Review 75, 76. This stuff gives me this feeling of like innocence, right? Like the Winterland was a place of innocence, of children and joy, right? Little did they know that it was a CIA child trafficking front. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't the first, people. Not at all. So this guy here on the left, Larry Rost, he was another Canadian He was a gold medalist. You can look him up. He won a gold medal in the Olympics in the 1950s, or I don't know whenever the hell the Olympics was back then, before 63. So, but he was a gay guy. And one of the things that kind of struck my interest when studying this stuff was he was connected to a bar up the road from the Winterland called Follies. It was a gay bar. And he was friends with, and this is a quote, 3 gay boys from New Orleans who would come in and they would do drag shows at Follies. It really doesn't have any bearing on the assassination. But again, like I've said before, the study of the assassination is the study of relationships. The study of relationships is fucking everything. And so when I see people connected to Kennedy or connected to other people in New Orleans who are all involved in this huge gay underground that was going on back in 1963, it just, I don't know. It makes me feel like I have more of an understanding of the personalities of the people involved. But let's move on. I'll stop fucking rambling. They had hockey teams. So it wasn't just ice skating. They had hockey stuff. They would put on all kinds of performances. Some interesting names pop up here. A couple of them connect to intelligence for sure, like Marchand. Here we have James Johns. I always wondered if he was connected to Lem Johns, but I kind of see the world through Kennedy colored glasses, so I think everything's connected to Kennedy when it's not. The Houston Figure Skating Club, 1972. So this is like real stuff, real history with real names, right? Like this is like a legitimate chunk of Winterland history. I'm sure if anyone wanted to take the time to study the names on these lists and do genealogies, you'd find probably some really interesting stuff. Oh, the Children of Spooks got to do something, right? Rulona Roland, the sister of Richard Roland. Richard Roland being the alleged son of Joyce Roland and Chuck Roland. Who, his name is Chuck Roland, sort of. But it's not the name they tell us. So yeah, I'll skip through most of this stuff. I just loved acquiring it. This is like some of the most... this gives the assassination like real character. This makes it real. Instead of just something you're reading about in a book. These are lives that were directly connected to aspects of it that these people never fucking knew about. And still don't. Some personal items from people who were there. Yeah, my collection of Winterland stuff is the best in the world. For sure. For sure. Too bad I just don't have the originals. All right, so now we're going to get into something a little more sinister. Baytown Youth signs contract with Ice Capades. Tell me if this sounds suspicious to you. It's unusual for a person to be hired by the Ice Capades after only 6 weeks of ice skating experience. But it's doubly unusual when that person is a native of Baytown, I guess that's in Texas, where the only ice is that of refrigerators. That's exactly what happened to Glenn Harper, 18-year-old son of Mr. and Mr. R.M. Harper of Route 1 Baytown. While the annual ice show was in Houston from September 5th to 13th, Glenn auditioned to become a member of the Ice Cadets. He was given a 6-year contract. On November 8th, he will join the show in Odessa. From there, he will go on to Canada and Nova Scotia. So Ice Capades, the premier fucking ice show in the world, gave a 6-year contract to a kid just out of high school who'd been fucking skating for 6 weeks. Does that sound suspicious to you? It's suspicious to me. Yeah, let's see if we can get to the bottom of this. His father is a supervisor in the maintenance and construction department at Humble Oil. Okay, that's all you need to know. You see, back then in the 60s, Ice Capades, Disney on Ice, all this shit, these traveling carnivals that you see pop up in Kennedy, these mobile traveling churches, they're all smuggling operations, all connected, all money laundering through the fake churches. That's what this is, right? You really fucking think they hired some fucking 18-year-old kid with 6 weeks experience into the most premier ice skating show in the world? Bullshit. He worked for Humble Oil. He was part of a smuggling operation, and I'll fucking bet my life on that. So Ferrie allegedly meets with Chuck Rowland when he gets there. This is official government documents. Charles Rowland. You'd think they would actually need to find out the names of the people that they put on the stand, right? People who went and fucking testified in court. You'd think they'd get an ID with their real name on it, because that's not his real fucking name. His real name is Roulon Chuck Rowland. Roulon. Why Roulon? Because he's a French Canadian. He's a half Korean French Canadian. All right. I looked into this guy. He just died a couple years ago. He was a Korean War veteran. Okay. And that becomes important because when was that? Like 56, 58, a couple years before this. He's a pro ice skater and he's running the Winterland, which turns out to be a CIA front. Yeah. They covered for him. His real name was Roulon Rowland, and they said his name was Roland Chuck Rowland. You think they wouldn't fucking know that? Give me a goddamn break. There also just so happens to be a Charles Rowland that the FBI has like a 300-page file on. Charles Chuck Rowland. And he's like a communist spy or something like that. Coincidence? I don't fucking think so, but I haven't had the time to dig into that one yet. All right, so the Winterland was started by Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts. This here is a flyer from Ice Follies, 1946. So, Miss Roberts so she's kind of famous at the time, at least. They had done all the touring stuff with the Ice Capades and Disney on Ice and whatnot. And the Winterland was started by the two of them. Now, the first problem I ran into when researching Ronnie Roberts is I find this. This is most certainly the same person, but it is dictated on the back of these notations here from 1959 that his name is Ronnie Roberts' son. Now, is this the alias, or is Roberts the alias? I really don't know. I'm leaning in the direction of Roberts' son being the alias, but then again, why would they have Roberts' son be the alias, but then use Roberts on a public flyer, right? So I really can't figure this out. It doesn't fit into the obituaries or the genealogies, but it's definitely the same person. So I don't know what the deal is. Maybe he just decided to change his name at some point for artistic purposes. Who knows? But this was like one of the first things that struck me as not right. And who actually is Mary Boots Roberts? Let's talk about Mary Boots Roberts real quick. All right. So she's one of the most important people you never heard of. Mary Boots Roberts, white, passed away on Saturday, the 29th of November. This was 2014. Beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother and friend. She accomplished much in her life, became a professional ice skater, and worked for NASA during the Apollo and Gemini missions. Really? Really? She worked for NASA during the Apollo and Gemini missions. Well, guess what? No, she fucking didn't. No, she fucking didn't. That was another cover job, because I will fucking write you a check for $1,000 if you can fucking find me one reference to Mary Boots Roberts and the fucking Apollo and Gemini missions other than this fucking obituary, because it doesn't exist. Trust me. When I got tripped up in this Winterland shit, I went on a fucking binge for like a month, and like I was obsessed, like drawing circles on the wall and shit. Like, I know every goddamn thing about the fucking Winterland there is to know. All right. And so she did not have anything to fucking do with the Apollo and Gemini missions. NASA was widely used as an intelligence front during the 50s and 60s. That's where your $400 fucking hammer comes from, because all that money got funneled to black ops. Period. So there we go. She owned several businesses and became an inspiration to many. She's preceded in death by her parents, Joe and Corinne Caltagirone, brother Joe Caltagirone Jr., husband and skating partner Ronnie Roberts, sons Ronald Anthony and Roland George Roberts. She's survived by her son Greg Roberts and wife Ann, daughter Rhonda Shook, blah, blah, blah. Not really too important with the rest of that. But I determined that her birth name was Caltagirone. And so when you get into history, there's two things that you need to really become experts at. And you need to really become experts at putting together genealogies. And you need to become an expert at interpreting fucking CIA obituaries, okay? Because that is an art unto itself. So in doing the genealogy of Mary Boots Roberts, going off of the names Joe and Corinne Caltagirone with brother Joe Caltagirone Jr., that's an excellent starting point. And it turns out that Joe Caltagirone Sr. had a brother named Vincent Caltagirone Sr., and Vincent Caltagirone Sr. had a son whose name was Vincent Caltagirone Jr. And so I'm like, okay, whatever. The Winterland kind of goes nowhere for me. And so I take a break and I go on to do some other things, which was funny because I took a break from studying the Winterland to go and study Jack Valente. And so here at this dead end right now with the Winterland and Vincent Caltagirone, and I got these genealogies laid out, and I'm like, I got nothing. So when you got nothing, don't just sit there and do nothing. Like, go do something else, right? So I did, and I went and I studied Jack Valente. And as I'm studying Jack Valente, of course, I lay out his genealogy, right? And of course, he's got a sister. His sister's name is Lorraine Valente, goes on to become Lorraine Valente Dinerstein. And so I'm looking through her obituary. And let's read this to make sure we're on the same page here. Like, she was born to Josephine and Joe Valente on the 24th of December, 1925. Yeah, so that's definitely her. In Houston, Texas. Lorraine was a kind, gentle soul. Family was most important to her. She's preceded in death by her loving husband, Ted Dinerstein. Her brother, Jack Valente, right? So we're talking about the same fucking Lorraine Valente. Mary Margaret Valente and her parents. She is survived by her son, Tom Caltagirone, and his wife, Lou, and her son named Jack Caltagirone. And, it was like, in the fucking movies when the car does the screech and the turnaround, like that was where I was. I'm like, wait a minute. What the fuck name did I just read? And I'm like, she is survived by her son, Tom Caltagirone, and his wife, Lou. I'm like, I know these fucking names. I'm like, wait a minute. Nah. Let me just go check this real quick. And so let me scroll back here, and I'm like, wait a minute. Joe and Corinne. Holy shit. I'm like, Caltagirone. It's the same fucking last name. And I'm like, holy shit. Let me go look at Vincent's. And I read Vincent's. Holy shit. He's survived by his wife of 50 years, Roberta Bobby Caltagirone, and sons Tom Caltagirone and wife Lou Caltagirone, and Jack Caltagirone. Ladies and fucking gentlemen, this moment right here was the moment that the Kennedy assassination got cracked. This moment right here. This was a complete fucking shot in the dark. I was studying two things that had nothing to do with each other. And then all of a sudden, they had everything to do with each other. Why is this important? Why is this the fucking most earth-shattering news in all of the Kennedy assassination that's ever been fucking discovered till now? Why? Because Vincent was the short tramp in Dealey Plaza. Vincent is the real Raoul. Vincent was undoubtedly Jack Valente's spotter on the grassy knoll. And Vincent is the first cousin of the woman who runs the ice skating rink that David Ferrie allegedly fucking went ice skating at, which, by chance, was owned by somebody very important. Because it wasn't owned by Mary Boots Roberts. Let me read this to you. This is a posting on Facebook from a couple years ago by Richard Rowland. Let me read this. It says, "This is my mom, Joyce Rowland. I saw some previous posts where there were questions about who owned the Winterland ice rink. Her recollection is that the Johnson family built the building at the rink." Let me stop right fucking there. Stop the presses. That is information that has never been available until at least 2019. And cracks the entire fucking case wide open. Lyndon Johnson, the president of the United States, accused in the Kennedy assassination, was the owner of the Winterland ice skating rink run by Mary Boots Roberts, whose first cousin is the real Raoul. All right, so let me show you the significance here. So Lyndon Johnson owns the Winterland. It's owned by his family business, which is known as the Johnson Family Enterprise. He leases the building to Mary Caltagirone Jr. Mary Caltagirone. Her first cousin is Vincent Caltagirone Jr. through her father and brother and all that stuff. Vincent is divorced from Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein in 1961. So Vincent, who was the cousin of Mary Boots Roberts, is the former brother-in-law of Jack Valenti. Jack Valenti was Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man. And they all lived in Houston. This is the fucking most important discovery made in the Kennedy assassination in 50 fucking years. And nobody else is talking about it. All right, so let me continue. Again, why is all of that significant? Well, David Ferrie goes and stays at the Alamo Motel, okay? November 28th, 1963, Lee Fletcher, Porter, Alamo Motel, made available the registration card for the 23rd of November, 1963, which reflected the following information. D.W. Ferrie, Alvin Boboof, and Melvin Coffey checked into room 119 at the Alamo Motel at 4:30 a.m. November 23rd, 1963, from New Orleans, Louisiana, and stayed until November 24th, 1963, around 8 or 9 p.m. They were driving a Comet automobile bearing Louisiana license 784892 or 784895. Let's look at this list of phone numbers. We have 2 phone numbers. UE 33757 and 947-6435. Those were numbers to G. Ray Gill's office in the Town and Country trying to get a hold of Marcello or G. Ray Gill, right? Next, we have 2 radio stations. This is super important. And the 2 radio stations named here, the connection between the 2 of them is super fucking important. First off, WSHO Radio was a small family-owned radio station in the 1950s. In the late 1950s, basically the CIA set out a plot to overtake, to take over fucking small radio stations across the country, and they did. Why? Who the fuck knows? Maybe it was the short-sighted thinking back in 1963. But Jack Martin was involved, and Jack Martin and a couple other people basically went and they beat up the fucking owner of WSHO. They roughed him up. They forced him into selling. And who did he sell to? He sold to Hank Greenspun and the fucking Sun newspaper out of Las Vegas. So, if you don't know who Hank Greenspun is, you're in luck. We're going to be doing a show on him coming up pretty soon. So that's one phone call made from the Alamo Motel. The other call is not WDSH, as it says. It's WDSU, and it's a television station, not a radio station. And the connection there was Walter Sheridan to the CIA. Walter Sheridan was in direct contact with a person who was connected to both WSHO and WDSU. And who is that person? Kerry Thornley. So Kerry Thornley brags in his statements to Garrison that he had friends at WSHO and WDSU. And he talks about how he has a friend in Walter Sheridan. I mean, if you read Kerry Thornley's 50-page affidavit, it's a confession, basically. So, and then here we go. The most important phone call that they made. The most important number, which went unidentified by everybody until I Googled it, which doesn't make any fucking sense. Why didn't some other schmuck Google it, right? All I had to do was Google it to figure out where it went. 60 fucking years, nobody could Google the goddamn phone number? Fuck. That's why I fucking hate Kennedy researchers. They're the dumbest fucking people that have ever walked the fucking earth. Jesus fucking Christ. Just Google the phone number. That's what I did, and I got the answer. Came back to the Gateway Pool Swim and Skate, right? The Gateway Swim and Skate. Let me see if I have a fucking picture. Yeah, I'm getting angry here. Fuck. I'm sorry. Every time I think of shitty Kennedy research, I just go fucking crazy. The Gateway Swim and Skate, all right? So the Gateway Swim and Skate was the phone number that they called from the Alamo Motel. Now, why the fuck is that important? Why is it important they called the Gateway? Because the Gateway was built in 1959. And where was the Gateway built? Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That we're going to get to next. So, I'm going to read you this statement. This is from a Houston Architecture Forum because you get the best information from the weirdest of places. And this is a post that some random person had up there when talking about the Winterland and a couple other things in Houston. It says, the Gateway Pool opened in 1959. I was 10 at the time. They had a huge grand opening and my parents bought me a season pass. Our house backed up close to it. I would ride my bike through the vacant lot next to our house, and it was just on the other side of the Alamo Motel. Okay? It was just on the other side of the Alamo Motel. Why is that fucking important? Because the Alamo Motel is where they fucking stayed when they went to Houston. So they go to the Alamo Motel. They stay at the Alamo Motel. They make a phone call to the Gateway. At some point, they go to the Gateway because David Ferrie says they went where? To the Bel Air. But guess what? The fucking Bel Air was knocked down in 1959, and the Gateway was built on top of it. So David Ferrie knew about a fucking skating rink that was knocked down 4 years prior to when he actually went there. How do you know that? Because that motherfucker had been involved in smuggling operations going back years. He knew that place as the Bel Air. He didn't know it as the Gateway. So that's why he said the Bel Air. That tells us a lot. That tells us about the relationship between him and the person he went and saw at the Gateway. And who the fuck did he go and see at the Gateway? Why did he try to call the Gateway? Well, here we go. So let me read some of Vincent T. Calderon's obituary. After graduating from St. Thomas High School in 1943, Vincent attended Texas A&M University, followed by an enlistment in the U.S. Navy, Naval Intelligence. Upon discharge, he received his bachelor's degree from University of Houston, CIA. Vincent was a board member of the National YMCA Scuba Program. The National YMCA Scuba Program. This becomes extremely significant. One of Vincent's recreational diversions was teaching scuba at the Houston downtown YMCA. Now, why the fuck is that important? You want to take a guess? Because the Gateway went on to become the Houston downtown YMCA. Okay? Vincent T. Calderon Jr. had been a fucking employee / trainer there from the days of the fucking Bel Air. That's why David Ferrie was trying to, that's why, I'm sorry, not David Ferrie. That is why their calls were made from the Alamo Motel to the Gateway. And that's why they allegedly went to the Gateway to see Vincent Calderon Jr., who worked at the Gateway, which then went on to become the Houston Downtown YMCA, which used to be the Bel Air. Hello. Can you see this chain of connectivity here? So, and why the fuck is this important? Because he was the short tramp in Dealey Plaza. And I feel that they were checking on him to make sure he got back to fucking Houston. That's what I think. Still working on proving that, but one day I will. So yeah, fucking absolutely amazing. That's definitely him. Same chin, same nose, but you can tell the picture on the right has been obfuscated. Nobody's eyes look like that, right? They've definitely tampered with the fucking picture itself. Plus, they all scrimped their faces. Like when you look at all the pictures of the tramps, and the tramps, by the way, are Leo Mosseri's the old tramp, Danny Green's the tall tramp, and Vincent Calderon Jr. is the short tramp, right? So when you look at them, they're scrunching their faces. They're doing like this the whole time. There's not a clean picture of any of their faces because that is tradecraft, the spycraft techniques. All right, and so in reference to the Winterland, this is like the big fucking kicker for me. When you look at the pictures of Joyce Rowland and Mary Boots Roberts that have been put forward, right? They're the same fucking person. Same fucking person. What do we do with that? You can find Mary Boots Roberts' obituary. You'll find an obituary for Joyce Rowland with one L. She died in 2020, I think, with no information whatsoever. So I've come across weird shit. Like I've come across fake obituaries. I'm pretty convinced I've come across fake obituaries the CIA planted. I don't know how to deal with this or how to decipher the real name from whatever, but sure as fuck, that's the same person. Is that it? All right. So, I don't even know how long I've been going. Only about an hour today. But that's the story of the Winterland. I think that's all we're going to cover today. I'm going to take the weekend off and we'll be back here on Monday. And that's going to do it. So I appreciate you tuning in. See you guys then.